Hello, my dear students. I greet you again. I hope all is well with you. You feel great. And I really hope that you listen to all our lectures that our teachers prepare for you because we are trying for you, our dear students. We stay at home these days of pandemic, but we will not lag behind study and education. Now let me read you next lecture on the history of pharmacy. The topic of today's lecture is pharmacy in the Middle Ages. Let me remind you, I am Afsana Mamadova, assistant of the Pharmaceutical Technology at Administration Department of Azerbaijan Medical University. And if you have any questions, you can contact me by email address indicated in the title page. The Middle Ages covered the period from the 5th to the 17th century. But people, when they say the Middle Ages, mean the period from fall of Rome in 476 AD and the beginning of Renaissance in the 14th century. This is period 1453. The Dark Ages is a categorization commonly used to describe the period between the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Italian Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. Roughly speaking, the Dark Ages corresponds to the Middle Ages or from 500 to 1500 AD. The phrase Dark Age itself derives from the Latin "saeculum obscurum", originally applied by Caesar Baronius in 1602 to a tumultuous period in the 10th and 11th centuries. The concept thus came to characterize the entire Middle Ages as a time of intellectual darkness between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance. This became especially popular during the 18th century, Age of Enlightenment. So the period of Dark Ages is characterized by influence of alchemy on development of medicine and pharmacy, by the increase of number of medicines and complication over of their making was brought to the origin of independent pharmacies. A selection pharmacy is in the special industry or function of doctor and chemist. The special state preparation of drugs is organized. Dear students, we have already talked about the differentiation of pharmacy in our previous lectures. Now back to this historical moment. Pharmacy differentiated during Middle Ages. Pharmaceutical knowledge and number of the drugs available grew considerably during the Middle Ages thanks primarily to the Arabic world. Pharmacy as a separate activity began to develop and privately owned pharmacies were established in Islamic lands. First known apothecary shop was opened in Baghdad in the 18th century, and the Muslims carried this concept into Europe during wars and other excursions into Africa, Spain, southern France. The time interval from the 9th to the 13th century remained known as the golden period of the Arab science, and the significant place among the taught sciences are occupied by medicine and pharmacy. In the history of medicine, Islamic medicine, also known as Arabic medicine, refers to the science of medicine developed in the Islamic Golden Age and written in Arabic. Arabs were able to use their cultural and natural researches and trade links to contribute to the strong development of pharmacy. After the collapse of Arab rules, the Arab territorial expenses and cultural heritage were taken over by the Turks. Arabs in the Middle Ages continued this topic. The key to the progress of science is continued in the comprehension of scientific phenomena, which is enabled by the knowledge of early achievements. Knowing the achievements of previous civilization, the mind is preparing for new discoveries and progress. Until the early flowering of the human intellect came to the shores of the Mediterranean, Sumerian, Babylonian, and Egyptian civilizations have paved the way for Greeks and Romans. When they began to collapse, there was a danger of breaking the continuity of understanding natural phenomena. But fortunately for the whole of humanity, authority. The achievements had been collected by the Arabs in the 8th century. Brilliant writings from all fields of science accumulated in Arab soil and then were translated and adopted by the living, excited, and ingenious Arab minds that were adopted, strengthened, and enriched with their own wisdom, opaque observations and experiments, and passed on to the West. In this slide, you see new term, Nestorianism. Nestorianism is the Christian theological doctrine that upholds several distinctive teachings in the fields of Christology and Mariology. It opposes the concept of hypostatic union and emphasizes that the two natures, human and divine, of Jesus Christ were joined by will raise and personhood. The Christological position is defined as a radical diophysitism. Nestorianism was named after Christian theologian Nestorius, life period 386 to 450, Patriarch of Constantinople from 428 to 431, who was influenced by Christological teachings of Theodore in Mopsuestia at the school of Antioch. Main types of drug-oriented contributions: formularies and compendiums, Arabic, Al-Dukkan, apothecary shop, discussions of useful medications. These formularies are practical, precise, side effects, additive effects. Herbal and books on the materia medica, strongly influenced by the Greco-Roman authority, Dioscorides. Ibn el-Bayr, best Islamic botanist, 13th century, 1800 botanical drugs, 145 mineral drugs, 135 drugs from animal searches. Toxicology treatises. They described toxic substances, toxic symptoms, antidotes. For us, new concept, Teriak, panacea. We are meeting in this slide. Teriak or teriaka is a medical concoction originally formulated by the Greeks in the 1st century AD and widely adopted in the ancient world as far away as Persia, China, and India via the trading links of the Silk Road. It was an alexipharmic or antidote, considered a panacea, for which it could serve as a synonym. In the 16th century, Adam Lonicer wrote that garlic was the rustic teriac of heal all. The word teriac comes from the Greek term teriake, a feminine adjective signifying pertaining to animals from terion, wild animal, beast. The ancient bestiaries include information often fanciful about dangerous beasts and their bites. When cane sugar was an exotic Eastern commodity, the English recommended the sugar-based treacle as an antidote against poison, originally applied as a salve. By extension, treacle could be applied to any healing property. In the Middle Ages, the treacle or healing well at Vincennes was a place of pilgrimage. Diet and drug therapy in relation to human ecology. The sick person requires a different mode of living, different food and drink than does the healthy person. Importance of unpolluted air for good health. Medicine in Arabian Caliphates. In 8th-7th centuries, the Arabs won Palestine, territory of modern states of Syria, Egypt, and Iran, northern part of Africa. Since 7th century developed the rich culture in the states of Near and Average East. The science has reached more higher levels than West European culture of that time. The Muslims Halifax continued to follow the practice of the Holy Prophet Muhammad (s.a.w) by appreciating and supporting the doctrine, and unlike the common practice of other conquerors, they forbid their armies to destroy the libraries for the objective respect of human search for knowledge. First, they built a strong and remarkably stable empire on great expanse of the Middle and Far East, and in the northern part of Africa and southwestern Europe. Arabian exhortations, their culture and science have spread to the front of Asia, the Mediterranean, and the Arabian Peninsula towards the Far East. This has allowed them, wherever they come, to be conquerors to propagate the culture and custom of the indigenous population by developing their own culture in newly established areas. Arabic medicine absorbed all the best from Hippocrates to Galen. Arabic medicine solved important problems independently too. Such issues were covered in Arabic treatises: body structure, the views on disease, the principles of the prophylaxis, the system of the training of doctors. In those countries that are largely part of Alexander the Great's empire, the Arabs have come to know the traditions of Hellenism and, with that, Greek medicine. In addition to the Greek as the most important, they inherited the books of Romans, Indians, Chinese, Persians, Syrians, and other nations. The Arab rulers, and especially the Khalifa al-Ma'mun in the 9th century, gave a special contribution to the development of science through the establishment of translation schools in which these books were translated into Arabic. Thus, Arabic language became the language of intellectual progress throughout the Muslim world throughout the Middle Ages. Among the first translated books are also books of great importance for the development of pharmacy. The contribution of Arabists. The books of Arabic science that came about in this period are not only by Muslim authors, but Arab civilization is the result of consecutive, persistent, and continuous efforts of various nations, regardless of the religion, race, and color of the skin, who lived and produced in the Arab region. It is also important to emphasize that Arabic medicine and pharmacy are the pluralist spirit. Arabic and the Turkish health system was based on several traditions that complement each other. The basic medical tradition was certainly Greek, but it was influenced by Islamic or prophetic medicine, and to a lesser extent by folk medicine. Arabs were also responsible for the establishment of pharmacy and chemistry as science. Methods of extracting and preparing medicines were brought to a high art. Arabic techniques of distillation, crystallization, solution, sublimation, reduction, and calcination, alkali, alcohol, alembic, and elixir are the influences of Arabs. Arabs translated the best Greek, Latin, Persian, and Indian manuscripts into the language. Arabs watched over development of science. The centers of science and higher education library were created in cities. Such are, for example, the Book of Herbs of Greek Theophrastus and Dioscorides, the Materia Medica, a book that encompasses an overview of ancient pharmacy and medicine. Using this as well as numerous other books of Greek medicine, the Arabs have taken over the theory of Greek art of treatment, primarily in the forms suggested by Hippocrates and Galen. They then added their own experiences that arose as a result of many years of research and re-examination of what they had accepted from previous civilization. Arabic practitioners used essentially the same methods as Greeks and Romans. Diagnosis was based on six criteria: the patient's behavior, the excreta, the other effluvia from the body, swelling, the character of pain, and the location of pain. The properties of the pulse were also carefully noted. I want to add to this information, Islam in the development of Arabic medicine and pharmacy was above all a motivating factor. The belief that God creates a cure in nature for every existing disease has led to the development of pharmacognosy. The Quran, as a moral code of the Muslims, has evolved the development of professional ethics, and the need of ritual washing has given rise to the cult of water in Islam, thus pointing to the importance of hygiene in preventive medicine. The knowledge of medicine spread to the Islamic Caliphate between the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century and the European Renaissance in the 15th century. Nevertheless, the true blossoming of Arabic medicine and pharmacy begins in the 9th century and coincides with the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate in the East. By establishing Abbasid Caliphate, centers of all activities and also scientific are moving from Syria to Iraq. The newly founded city of Baghdad becomes the capital and the center of culture and science of the empire. Significant centers of learning were also cities like the previous capitals Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba and Granada in Spain. In these cities, scientific institutions, schools, libraries, and hospitals have been built, and soon the first pharmacies, whereby doctors or wise men from all over the world comes to these cities. They were dedicated to collecting data and orchestrating scientific development. The most common surgical technique was cauterization, which used for both internal and external diseases. Anesthesia by means of a sponge saturated in a narcotic acid held to the nose and mouth was widespread. Medicine in Caliphate on the special place and considered the first among sciences. Considerable development of organization of medical business got in Caliphate. The first Muslim hospital was an asylum to contain leprosy, built in the early 8th century, where patients were confined but, like the blind, were given a stipend to support their families. The earliest general hospital was built in 805 in Baghdad by Harun al-Rashid. By the 10th century, Baghdad had five more hospitals, while Damascus had six hospitals by the 15th century, and Cordoba alone had 15 major hospitals, many exclusively for the military. Many of the prominent earlier Islamic hospitals were founded with assistance by Christians, such as Jibril ibn Buktushi from Gandeshapur. Bimaristan is a compound of bimar, which means sick or ill, and stan, which means place. In the medieval Islamic world, the word Bimaristan referred to a hospital establishment where the ill were welcomed, cared for, and treated by qualified staff. So, uh, most historical moment, the first information about foundation of hospitals belong to 800s. To 1160 over 60 hospitals were counted in Baghdad. In Caliphate there were some beginnings of state medicine, special persons with supervision above medical and pharmacy business. Examinations of doctors were conducted at schools and academies. Large development on the east was attained by chemistry, more faithful such its direction as alchemy. In Baghdad, the first pharmacies or drugstores were established in 754 under the Abbasid Caliphate during the Islamic Golden Age. By the 9th century, their pharmacies were state-regulated. Alchemy and chemistry in Islam refers to the study of both traditional alchemy and early practical chemistry, the early chemical investigation of nature in general, by scholars in the medieval Islamic world. The word alchemy was derived from the Arabic word kimia and may ultimately derive from the ancient Egyptian word kemi, meaning black. So the Arabic prefix of al and chemistry, and so it means stone of wisdom. Main task alchemy is converting of cheap metals into gold. For this purpose, they tried to find a metal which quicker ripening of gold. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the focus of alchemical development moved to the Caliphate and the Islamic civilization. Much more is known about Islamic alchemy as it was better documented. Most of the earlier writings that have come down through the years were preserved as Arabic translations. This powder alchemists named elixir, so a word appeared elixir. An elixir must was own other magical properties to heal of all diseases and give immortality. At this period, alchemists were done a lot of openings. Among them is a recipe of sulfuric, nitric, and vinegar acids, salts of mercury, perfection of such processing as bathing, filtration, crystallization, making vehicle for distillation of water, and others. Distillation was utilized for a recipe cleaning of alcohol, which was adopted the spirit of wine because it turned out distillation of wine. At this time were convinced that an alcohol is most strong medicine. He was named Aqua of Vitae, water of life. Abu Bakr Muhammad bin Zakaria al-Razi. The full name of al-Razi is considered to be one of the greatest clinical physicians of medieval world. His authority in medicine is second only to Shaykh ul-Rais ibn Sena, Avicenna, European name Avicenna, but in regards to observational powers, Al-Razi was far superior to Ibn Sina. Al-Razi was an accomplished physician, philosopher, physicist, and chemist. His insight, sharp intellect, and encyclopedic knowledge earned him the title of Arabic Galen. He was a master of prognosis and psychosomatic medicine. Al-Razi was born around 865 in Rai, near Tehran, as the name Al-Razi indicates. He studied philology, mathematics, philosophy, logic, chemistry, and music, but at age 30 he devoted himself to medicine. In his youth he was a great lute player. He traveled to Baghdad to acquire medical education, subsequently becoming a director of a royal hospital in his native Rai. Later at Baghdad's famous Muqtadiri Hospital. While in Baghdad, he learned the art of healing from a well-known physician Ali ibn Sahal, period 870, who was superintendent for all government hospitals. Ali ibn Sahal devised new methods for treatment of diseases, documented all cases in his diary. Subsequently, this diary was published as Firdaus ul Hikmah, which was arranged alphabetically. This book was indeed first medical encyclopedia of the world. Al-Razi was called Galen, as we already talked about it in his time. Al-Razi was specialist in hygiene. When it was necessary to choose a place for building the hospital, he hung some meat in different places of the city. Where the meat was preserved best of all, the construction was started. In Baghdad, Razi was a respected teacher and court physician to Buharit Emir Adud al-Dawlao, period 949 to 83. As director of the Baghdad General Hospital, here he performed the duties of both hospital director and dean of medical school. He issued instructions to have a ward exclusively devoted to the mentally ill. Al-Razi traveled to many distant cities for purpose of acquiring knowledge, was in touch with eminent scholars of his time. He authored close to 200 works in philosophy, astronomy, physics, chemistry, and medicine. He was a Persian, but most of his work were written in Arabic, which was lingua franca at that time. He was highly esteemed for his learning, diagnosis, and therapeutic skills, which was based upon observation of the course of the disease and laying stress upon hygienic and dietetic measures. He was a tireless writer of immense productiveness and versatility and an inspired teacher. He advised his students while they were examining a patient to bear in mind the classic symptoms of a disease as given in a textbook and compare them with what they observed. Al-Biruni, the celebrated scientist from present Afghanistan, prepared a catalogue of Al-Razi's books and treatises numbering well over 184. Most of these books have been lost, but some have survived through Latin translation. This catalogue was published in German language in 1924 from Berlin under the title Al-Biruni als Quell für das Leben und die Schriften al-Razi. Medicine was a central part of medieval Islamic culture. Responding to circumstances of time and place, location, Islamic physicians and scholars developed a large and complex medical literature exploring, analyzing, and synthesizing and theory and practice of medicine. Sabur ibn Sahl, he lived in the period 869 CE, was a 9th century Persian Christian physician from the Academy of Gandhishapur. Among other medical works, he wrote one of the first medical books on antidotes called Agrabadin. Was divided into 22 volumes and which was possibly the earliest of its kind to influence Islamic medicine. This antidote enjoyed much popularity until it was superseded Ibn al-Timid's version later in the first half of 20th century. Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, European called him Abul Gassis because his Arabic name Abu al-Qasim, was an Arab physician, surgeon, and chemist. Considered the greatest surgeon of the Middle Ages, he has been described as the father of surgery. Al-Zahrawi's principal work is the Kitab al-Tasrif, a 30-volume encyclopedia of medical practices. The surgery chapter of this work was later translated into Latin, attaining popularity and becoming the standard textbook in Europe for the next 500 years. Al-Zahrawi's pioneering contribution to the field of surgical procedures and instruments had an enormous impact in the East and West well into the modern period, where some of his discoveries are still applied in medicine to this day. He was the first physician to identify the hereditary nature of hemophilia and to describe an abdominal pregnancy, a subtype of ectopic pregnancy that in those days was a fatal affliction. Abu Rayhan al-Biruni, 973 after 1050. He was a Persian scholar and polymath. He has been variously called as the founder of Indology, father of comparative religion, father of modern geodesy, and the first anthropologist. Al-Biruni was well versed in physics, mathematics, astronomy, and natural sciences, and also distinguished himself as a historian, chronologist, and linguist. He studied almost all fields of science and was compensated for his research and strenuous work. Royalty and powerful members of society sought out al-Biruni to conduct research and study to uncover certain findings. He lived during the Islamic Golden Age. In addition to this type of influence, al-Biruni was also influenced by other nations, such as the Greeks, who he took inspiration from when he turned to studies of philosophy. He was conversant in Kharizmian, Persian, Arabic, Sanskrit, and also knew Greek, Hebrew, and Syriac. He spent much of his life in Ghazni, the capital of the Ghaznavid dynasty in modern-day central eastern Afghanistan. In 1017, he traveled to the Indian subcontinental and authored a study of Indian culture, Tariq al-Hind, History of India, or in Arabic it written so Tariq al-Hind. After exploring the Hindu faith practiced in India, he was an impartial writer on customs and creeds of various nations and was given the title Al-Ustad, the master, for his remarkable description of early 11th century India. His role for pharmacy, Al-Biruni wrote one of the most valuable Islamic works in pharmacology entitled Kitab al-Saydallah, the Book of Drugs, Kitab al-Saydallah, where he gave detailed knowledge of the properties of drugs and summarized the role of pharmacy and the functions of duties as a pharmacist. Ibn Sina, also known as Abu Ali Sina, and often known in the West as Avicenna, who lived in the years 900 from 980 until June 1037, was a Persian polymath who is regarded as one of the most significant physicians, astronomers, thinkers, and writers of the Islamic Golden Age, and the father of early modern medicine. Avicenna is also called the most influential philosopher of the pre-modern era. He was a peripatetic philosopher influenced by the Aristotelian philosophy. Of the 450 works he is believed to have written, around 240 have survived, including 150 on philosophy and 40 on medicine. His most famous works are the Book of Healing, a philosophical and scientific encyclopedia, and the Canon of Medicine, a medieval encyclopedia which became a standard medical text at many medieval universities and remained in use as late as 1650. Besides philosophy and medicine, Avicenna's corpus includes writings on astronomy, alchemy, geography and geology, psychology, Islamic theology, logic, mathematics, physics, and works of poetry. So Avicenna is a prominent scientist of world history. A large scientist of the Arabic world, Avicenna is the founder of the pharmacy in the Middle Ages. Avicenna was born not far away from Bukhara, Tajikistan. There got education. He was engaged in the advanced and practical study in Iran. A lot of works are written them on the themes of medical art. According to his autobiography, Avicenna had memorized the entire Quran by the age of 10. He learned Indian arithmetic from an Indian greengrocer Mahmud Masahi, and he began to learn more from a wandering scholar who gained a livelihood by curing the sick and teaching the young. He also studied fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, under the Sunni Hanafi scholar Ismail al-Zahid. Avicenna was taught some extent or of philosophy books such as Introduction, Isagogue's Porphyry, philosopher, Euclid's Elements, Ptolemy's Almagest by an unpopular philosopher, Abu Abdullah Natili, who claimed philosophizing. As a teenager, he was greatly troubled by the metaphysics of Aristotle, which he could not understand until he read Al-Farabi's commentaries on the work. For the next year and a half, he studied philosophy, in which he encountered greater obstacles. In such moments of baffled inquiry, he would leave his books, performs the requisite ablutions, then go to the mosque and continue in prayer till light broke on his difficulties. Deep into the night, he would continue his studies, and even in his dreams, problems would pierce him and work out their solution. 40 times it is said he read through the metaphysics of Aristotle till the words were imprinted on his memory, but their meanings was hopelessly obscure to him until he purchased a brief commentary by Al-Farabi from a bookstall for 3 dirhams, at that time a very low price. So great was his joy at the discovery made with the help of a work from which he had expected only a mystery, that he hastened to return thanks to God and bestowed alms upon the poor. He turned to medicine at 16 and not only learned medical theory but also by uh, greatest attendance of the sick had, according to his own account, discovered new methods of treatment. The teenager achieved full status as a qualified physician at the age 13 and found that medicine is no hard and thorny science like mathematics and metaphysics. So I soon made great progress. I became an excellent doctor and began to train patients using appropriate remedies. The useful physician, his fame spread quickly, and he treated many patients without asking for payment. When only 21, he wrote a scientific encyclopedia. His principal contribution was a compiler and a commentator. Ibn Sina describes no less than 700 preparations, their properties, mode of action, and their indications. He suggested the communicable nature of tuberculosis. The most renowned of his approximately 100 books was the Kanon, Al-Ganun in Arabic. Al-Ganun, the Canon of Medicine, an encyclopedia of medicine in 5 books completed in 1025. It presents an overview of contemporary medical knowledge of the Islamic world, which had been influenced by earlier traditions, including Greco-Roman medicine, particularly Galen, Persian medicine, Chinese medicine, and Indian medicine. The canon of medicine remained a medical authority for centuries. It set the standards for medicine in medieval Europe and the Islamic world and was used as a standard medical textbook through the 18th century in Europe. It is still used in Unani medicine, a form of traditional medicine practiced in India. The medical traditions of Galen and Therapy Hippocrates had dominated Islamic medicine from its beginnings. Avicenna sought to fit these traditions into Aristotle's natural philosophy. He began writing the canon in Georgiani, continued in Ray, and completed it in Hamadan in 1025. The result was a clear and ordered summa of all the medical knowledge of Ibn Sina's time. It served as a more concise reference in contrast to Galen's 20 volumes of medical corpus. Canon of Medicine consists of 5 volumes. 2 books of canon were devoted to medicines, a second simple, fifth to the difficult medical forms. The second book of canon is divided into 2 treatises. The first treatise includes sections about the system of simple medications, about properties of simple medications, about looking to some external medications, and about their storage. Avicenna begins part 1 by dividing theoretical medicine and medical practice. He describes what he says are the 4 causes of illness based on Aristotelian philosophy: the material cause, the efficient cause, the formal cause, and the final cause. Material cause, Avicenna says that this cause is the human subject itself, the members of the breath or the humors indirectly. Efficient cause. The efficient cause is broken up into 2 categories. The first is extrinsic, or the sources external to the human body, such as air or the religion we live in. The second efficient cause is the intrinsic, or the internal sources, which are our sleep and its opposite, the waking state, the different periods of life, habits, and race. Formal cause. The formal cause is what Avicenna called the constitutions, the compositions. According to Oscar Cameron Gruner, who provides a treatise with Avicenna's canon of medicine, this was in agreement with Galen, who believed that the formal cause of illness is based upon the individual's temperament. Final cause. The final cause is given as actions of functions. Uh, Thesis second, the elements of cosmology. Avicenna's thesis on the elements of the cosmos is described by Gruner as the foundation of the whole canon. Avicenna insists there that a physician must assume the 4 elements that are described by natural philosophy. Also, Avicenna makes it clear that he distinguishes between the simple element, not mixed with anything else, and what we actually experience as water or air, such as the sea or the atmosphere. The elements we experience are mixed with small amounts of other elements and are therefore not the pure elemental substances. The light elements are fire and air, while the heavy air, earth, and water. In the 4th book of canon spared much attention to poisons and antidotes. Poisons are separately examined, vegetable, animal, and also poisoning. These poisons are and helps from poisonings. In the 5th book of canon, Avicenna describes different difficult medical forms, technology of their making and application, pharmacy of Avicenna on many aged past pharmacy of Europe. Pharmacists used his works over 500 years. Avicenna also required the first to conduct the previous test to medications on animals and only after it to appoint the man. medicine and pharmacy of Europe. Around 500 AD, hordes of Goths, Vikings, Vandals, and Saxons, often collectively referred to as barbarians, invaded much of Western Europe. The whole area broke up into a large number of tiny fiefdoms, territories run by feudal lords. The feudal lord literally owned his peasants. These fiefdoms had no public health system, universities, or centers of excellence. Scientific theories were not exchanged per communication. The only places for learning and studying monasteries. In many places, only monks knew how to read and write. Greek and Roman medical records and literature disappeared. Stagnation was observed in Europe at that time. Much medical knowledge from the ancient world was lost. The quality of medical practitioners was poor. The Catholic Church did not allow corpses to be dissected. People were encouraged to pray and fear of not doing as they were told by church teaching. How they interpreted the origin of the disease and how the treatment was presented. Sickness, punishment for a sin or a test of faith. Sole appropriate response to suffer. Possible cure undeserved and unpredictable intervention of God. The planets were also responsible for disease, so doctors were good at astrology and astronomy. Health caregivers. There were many people to go to for diagnosis and treatment. Doctors, very expensive, monks from the local monastery, apothecaries, people who sold herbs and drugs, local wise men and women. The Christian hospices were the first ever to be devoted to long-term support of the diseased, poor and downtrodden. Enthusiasm, charity, and good cheer sustained those in charge, often women of good birth. Middle ages in the West are characterized by a new phenomenon which did not know the age-old word, large epidemics. There were the special disease establishments in the port cities of Europe, Venice, Genoa. Port supervisors, guardians of health, appeared. City doctors appeared later. The special rules, regulations which had for a purpose warning of skidding and distribution of contagious illness were published in some cities. Hospitals were opened at monasteries. In 1347 to 9, the Black Death came to Eastern Europe and spread to the West. The crowded, dirty living conditions in the English cities led to the rapid spread of the disease. Between 1348 and 1350, the Black Death killed about 30 to 40% of the population of England, which was estimated to be about 5 to 6 million. The symptoms of the Black Death were terrible and swift. Painful swellings, buboes of the lymph nodes. A bubo was at first a red color. The bubo then turned a dark purple color or black. Other symptoms of the Black Death included a very high fever, delirium, the victim begins to vomit, muscular pains, bleeding in the lungs, mental disorientation. Victims only lived between 2 to 4 days after contracting the deadly disease. How can surgery be described during this period? Cauterizing, bandaging, bleeding, and cupping was done by untrained folk doctors, laymen, and charlatans. Nevertheless, some outstanding physicians practiced surgery and wrote about it. And how was the treatment? Diet was thought extremely important in the treatment of illness. General reliance was placed on broth, milk, and eggs. Plant materials were most often used in the preparation of digestives, laxatives, emetics, diuretics, diaphoretics, styptics, and the like. The most frequently used medication was teriac, thought especially effective against poisons. Manuscripts from many islands were translated or copied for monastery libraries. The monks gathered herbs and simples in the field or raised them in their own herb gardens. These they prepared according to the art of the apothecary for the benefit of the sick and injured. Gardens such as these still may be found in monasteries in many countries. During the Middle Ages, the remnants of the Western knowledge of pharmacy and medicine were preserved in the monasteries, 5th to 12th centuries. These sciences are known to have been taught in the cloisters as early as the 7th century. What about monastic medicine? Monastics who acted as physicians were required to consult Dioscorides' writings, read Latin translations of the works of Hippocrates and Galen, and study the works of others. By their nature, monastic medicine and pharmacy were dogmatic, their most important element being faith. The center of medicine in the Middle Ages were universities, which in the primarily kind presented the corporation of students, which was analogical workshops. Then were opened universities in Bologna, Paris, Oxford, and other cities. The number of students in these universities was very insignificant, not exceeding a few on all of faculties. The first medical school was opened in Salerno, Italy. The personal touch of official medicine of Middle Ages were difficult medical samples of writing. The number of ingredients in one recipe quite often reached to a few 10. The special place was occupied by antidotes, so-called terpak, which included 70 and more component parts. Basic component part is serpentine meat. Terpak was considered also a mean against all of internal illnesses. These facilities were valued very expensive. Making of them, as a rule, was conducted in public in the presence of guests and invited persons. In some European states, the functions of doctor and chemist parted by king decrees, forbidden doctors to trade in medications and to the druggists engaged in treatment. In the same period, the order of receipt of pharmaceutical education was legalized in Europe. For example, to get pharmaceutical education in France, it is necessary it was to visit 4 years a student in a pharmacy, then 10 years to work in quality the helper of druggist, and only after it to go in for an exam on the receipt of rank of druggist. In connection with organization of the first pharmacies, the revisions of pharmacies were set. The oaths of druggists, which prepared medicinal preparations, governed storage and vacation of poisons. What can we say about the medicine of the Renaissance? The beginning of the Renaissance is dated from AD 1453, when the fall of Constantinople drove many scholars with knowledge of Greek and Roman learning westwards to about 1750. What means the word Renaissance? The word Renaissance originated from the Italian Rinascimento, rebirth. A Renaissance meant a return not only to the original writings of the Greeks but also the Greek spirit, individualism, liberty of thought, etc. Characteristics of this period: the human life has came into the center of interest. The attention is focused to the nature, interest in new informations, rebirth of independent thought. There are many innovations in Renaissance period, such as Columbus reached America in 1492, opportunity for physical expansions and expression. Vasco da Gama found on an all-water route the East India, 1498. Introduction of printing. Europe became the dominant continent of the world. Varying ideas and systems gained international acceptance, influencing the materia medica and sorted, pharmacy, Leonardo da Vinci, human dissections, and etc. 6 key changes. Governments were strong and rich. The economy boomed and trade prospered. People could afford doctors. Artists insisted that art had to be based on the most accurate observation possible. This led them to study the body and visit dissection and improve knowledge of anatomy. Revival of learning. Beginning of scientific method conducting an experiment, collecting observations, then coming to a conclusion. This was vital for the development of medicine. The invention of the printing press allowed new ideas to spread more quickly around Europe. The discovery of America by Columbus meant that new foods and medicines were brought back from the New World. The invention of new weapons, especially gunpowder, led to soldiers getting different sorts of wounds, which battlefield doctors had to deal with. We tend to think of this as a grim reality facing the old, but in the medieval and early modern worlds it was an ever-present fear of the young. In Western societies today, the infant mortality rate is around 9 per 1,000 live births. In the 1500s, it was about 150 to 200 per 1,000 live births, and it could be double that in martial areas where malarial fevers were endemic. Moreover, about 50% of children had died by the age of 15. Cities tended to be the least healthy, with highly unsanitary conditions and people living in close proximity. In London, for instance, the death rate exceeded the birth rate, so that its population had to be sustained by constant immigration. On average, those living in the 1500s and 1600s could expect at birth to live between 13 and 30 and 40 years. New diseases appeared. People died from a wide variety of ailments: smallpox, plague, dysentery, diphtheria, tuberculosis, scarlet fever, whooping cough, influenza, and pneumonia. If one survived these infections in childhood, one could expect a reasonable level of longevity. The image to the right from the 1500s fittingly shows this conquering all. No one was immune, even if the rich and well-housed had an advantage. New diseases also ensured that populations devastated by the Black Death of the 14th century only slowly recovered. In particular, syphilis and typhus killed many millions. Typhus, arriving in the late 1400s, was spread by infected flies and decimated the denizens of jails and army camps. Syphilis appeared in the early 1490s, almost certainly not far from the New World, and assumed an extreme from that was gradually replaced by milder and chronic strains in the late 1500s. Plague also remained one of the biggest takers of human life. It killed about a fifth of London's population in 1563, in 1603, and in 1665, while a combination of plague and starvation destroyed something like three-quarters of the people of Genoa in 1656. Responses were, as during the Middle Ages, both medical and religious. Physicians visited plague patients wearing beaks stuffed with herbs in an attempt to dry the area throat to cause plague. Just as in the medieval age, secular and religious um, explanations so existed more than they completed. For the most part, they were seen as complementary. Holy processions were also standard fare, so when the Archbishop of Milan, Carlo Borromeo, led such a procession in 1576, holding before him an alleged nail of the cross, he acceded to the wish of the health plague lifeboard that women and children be allowed to stay at home. The Archbishop was accepting both contagianism and the need to supplicate God. The very idea of a health board was relatively new. There was even one operating in the Papal States. Organized responses to epidemics became more common in the 15th and 16th centuries. Spreading from Italy, France, Scotland, and Russia established cordons sanitaires with isolation facilities and controls on trade. In England, a proclamation stated that houses infected by the plague had to mark for 40 days. After 1578, both sick and healthy had to be confined inside and were not allowed to receive any visitors. A striking novelty here is that the public was taxed in order to set up and maintain public health measures. By the 1700s, the Habsburg monarch, who ruled much of modern-day Germany and parts of Eastern Europe, were imposing cordons sanitaries over uh, waste areas to prevent plague arriving from the east. This was an amazing, elaborate system. Peasants were rewarded with land for spending 5 years, ensuring that the borderlands were guarded and no one sick made in throat. When there were reports of plague, as many as 7,000 men were drafted to enforce the quarantine. The method worked here and elsewhere very effectively. This is one explanation for why the Black Death receded from Europe during the 1600s, ceasing to be a major threat in the early 1700s. Physicians in the 1500s, just the medieval predecessors, faced competition from a wide variety of other healers. Surgeons and apothecaries often diagnosed and treated sickness even though the elite physicians tried to stop them from doing so. In early colonial North America, there were hardly any university-trained physicians, and there were no hospitals till Pennsylvania Hospital was founded in 1751. In colonial America, the distinction between druggists, surgeons, and physicians broke down. In New England, for example, the doctor was responsible for all three and learned via an apprenticeship composed name until the late 1600s in Europe and America. It was usually women who acted as midwives. Doctors were seldom involved in births. Likewise, on both sides of the Atlantic, most people were treated by themselves, by priests, or by household elders, especially adult women who had recipe books of family cures. Many also consulted white witches who recommended simple herbal remedies. There was nearly always a white witch within a few hours' walk. The brilliant and melancholic English professor Robert Burton explained in 1621. It is a common practice of some men to go first to a witch and then to a physician. If one cannot, the other shall. If they cannot bend heaven, they will try hell. Opening of new remedies. Physicians were also increasingly open to new remedies. In the early 1500s, a leading herbal described 258 known plants. Under a century later, the standard botanical text told of around 6,000 different plants. Paracelsus was born in 1493 and died in 1541. Born Theophrastus von Hohenheim, full name Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, was a Swiss physician and alchemist, a late theologian, and a philosopher of the German Renaissance. He was not considered a cosmographer, a mathematician, or an astronomer. He was a pioneer in several aspects of the medical revolution of the Renaissance, emphasizing the value of observation in combination with received wisdom. He is credited as the father of toxicology. Paracelsus also had a substantial impact as a prophet of or diviner, his prognostications being studied in Rosicrucians in the 1600s. Paracelsianism is the early modern medical movement inspired by the study of his work. Paracelsus extended his interest in chemistry and biology to what is now considered toxicology. He clearly expounded the concept of dose response in his third defense, where he stated that solely the dose determines that a thing is not a poison. Sola dosis facet venenum. Only the dose makes the poison. This was used to defend his use of inorganic substances in medicine, and outsiders frequently criticized Paracelsus' chemical agents as too toxic to be used as therapeutic agents. His belief that diseases located in a specific organ was extended to inclusion of target organ toxicity. That is, there is a specific site in the body where a chemical will exert its greatest effect. Paracelsus also encouraged using experimental animals to study both beneficial and toxic chemical effect. Paracelsus introduced instead of this the concept of the body as a chemical laboratory. As a result, international use of chemical remedies, mineral salts, acids, and substances prepared by chemical processes such as distillation and extraction. Famous phrase, it is not the task of alchemy to make gold, to make silver, but to prepare medicine. In 1528, he started his lectures at Basel in Germany. In these lectures, he explained the symptoms of the life on the basis of chemistry. According to his opinion, there is a selection force in the living organs called arcans, which divided foods in the stomach to a pure and impure, which equal tartarus parts. The former goes to the blood and the latter is secreted. According to his conception, all drugs used for medical treatment contain an arcanum which can be prepared in the form of quintessentia, in the form of tincture, or elixir, the prepared tinctures, extracts, and infusums instead of the total herbs. He introduced metal compounds to pharmacy like antimony, arsenic, lead, iron, and mercury. Mercury was the most successful medicine. By emphasizing these aspects of Paracelsus, we have to say that he was too modern and scientific. His system of medicine was embedded within a large religious mystical philosophy. Paracelsus' search for effective remedies was thus not carried out on strictly empirical and scientific grounds. While Paracelsus' relation to the rise of pharmaceutical chemistry is complex, he did influence tremendously the transformation of pharmacy from a profession based primarily on botanic science to one based on chemical sciences. Under the influence of the followers of Paracelsus, many chemical remedies were introduced into the pharmacopoeias of Western Europe in the 17th century. In his own speculation on the basic nature of matter, he did not drop the idea of the four Aristotelian elements as such. However, Paracelsus considered them primary principles. Sulfur, mercury, and salt were by no means simply identical with the substances generally understood by these names. Sulfur represented the principle of combustibility, mercury that of liquidity and volatility, salt being permanent and resisting the action of fire represented that of stability. Disease was caused, according to Paracelsus, by a local separation of one of these three principles from the other two. This idea did have the advantage that emphasizing the localized nature of disease, disease as believed to be localized in a given organ. Paracelsus stressed the need for a treatment that would be specific in that particular disease. The action of a remedy did not depend upon qualities such as moistures, but on its specific healing virtue, which was determined by its chemical properties. In 1527, Paracelsus was appointed town physician and lecturer in Basel. He invited all people, including barber surgeons, to his lecture theatre. 3 weeks later, he started his first lecture by burning a book by Galen and Avicenna. He lectured in German, not in Latin. Galen is a liar and a fake. Avicenna is a kitchen master. They are good for nothing. You will not need them. Reading never made a doctor. Patients are the only books. You will follow me. Paracelsus is frequently credited with reintroducing opium to Western Europe during the German Renaissance. He extolled the benefits of opium and of a pill he called laudanum, which has frequently been asserted by others to have been an opium tincture. Paracelsus did not leave a complete recipe, and the known ingredients differ considerably from 17th century laudanum. His work Die grobe Wahrung Darznei is a forerunner of antisepsis. The specific empirical knowledge originated from his personal experiences as an army physician in the Venetian Wars. Paracelsus demanded that the application of cow dung, feces, and other noxious concoctions eat wounds be surrendered in favor of keeping the wounds clean, stating, "If you prevent infection, nature will heal the wound all by herself." During his time as a military surgeon, Paracelsus was exposed to the crudity of medical knowledge at the time when doctors believed that infection was a natural part of the healing process. He advocated for cleanliness and protection of wounds as well as regulation of diet. Popular ideas of the time opposed these theories and suggested sewing of plastering wound. Historians of syphilitic diseases credit Paracelsus with the recognition of the inherited character of syphilis. In his first medical publication, a short pamphlet of syphilis treatment that was also the most comprehensive clinical description the period ever produced, he wrote a clinical description of syphilis in which he maintained that it could be treated by carefully measured doses of mercury. Similarly, he was the first to discover that the disease could only be contracted by contact. Doctrine of signatures. Paracelsus believed that God had left signs in things of the maladies they were designed to treat. The pomegranate apparently looks a bit like teeth when peeled, and so Paracelsus insisted that it was ideal for treating toothache. Paracelsus invented or at least named a sort of liniment, "eau del doc," a mixture of soap and alcohol, to which camphor and sometimes a number of herbal essences, most notably wormwood, were added. Paracelsus' recipe forms the basis for most later versions of liniment. Andreas Vesalius. The most brilliant anatomist was Andreas Vesalius. Born in Brussels, Vesalius studied medicine in Paris and then took up a chair at the University of Padua in Italy. In 1538, Vesalius published the Tabula Sex, six large sheets of drawings. In some drawings, liver had 5 lobes. One drawing showed 2-lobed liver. Vesalius was beginning to question what Galen said. Vesalius starts from the outside and works in from skin to bones. Vesalius corrected some of Galen's mistakes. New way of teaching, public dissections backed up with pictures. It was new type of book. Vesalius's book was printed, not handwritten, so there were lots of copies. Soon each medical school in Europe had a copy. Iatrochemistry. Paracelsus was a mystic as well as a revolutionary empiricist. His idea of a vital force and the concept that sickness reflects chemical changes in the body has followers. Jean-Baptiste van Helmont, lifetime 1577 to 1644. He is famous as the discoverer of carbonic acid, which he called gas sylvester, thus originating the concept and the term gas. François de la Boétie Sylvius, a lifetime 1614 to 1672, real founder of the doctrine of iatrochemistry. His theory was a kind of compromise between humoral pathology and ideas of Paracelsus. A new concept, fermentation. He believed that food is transformed through saliva and a ferment secreted from the pancreas, and that blood becomes the life-maintaining substance. Continuous transformations take place which influenced by the body temperature and the spirits of life, resulting in either alkaline or acid end product. If both are in the right proportion, qualitatively and quantitatively, the person concerned is healthy. Disease, on the contrary, is caused by acrimony or excess of either the acid or the alkaline substances or the being at a wrong place. According to chemical theory, this acrimony leads to a change in the blood, the bile, or the lymph. Hence, all diseases were subdivided into those based on alkaline or an acid acrimony. This medical chemical theory became naturally the basis for preparing new chemical drugs. This felt need for an adequate explanation of known effects attracted a number of physicians of the 17th century to another hypothesis, the astrophysical or mechanical theory developed some decades before Sylvius' hypothesis of Santorio Santorio, lifetime 1561 to 1636. It was based on a concept of the body as a kind of engine following mainly physical laws. Santorio invented the first instrument to measure body temperature, a predecessor to our clinical thermometer, and to make the first systematic attempt to explain by as exact means as possible what we call metabolism. Late period of the Middle Ages are characterized new direction in chemistry, medical chemistry. Medicinal or pharmaceutical chemistry is a scientific discipline at the intersection of chemistry and pharmacology involved with designing, synthesizing, and developing pharmaceutical drugs. Medicinal chemistry involves the identification, synthesis, and development of new chemical entities suitable for therapeutic use. It also includes the study of existing drugs, their biological properties, and their quantitative structure, activity relationships. My dear students, I think so much information is enough for the first part of our lecture on topic in the pharmacy in the Middle Ages. In the second part of our lecture, we will continue our topic. Thank you for attention.